My name is Professor De-Valera Botchway. I am a historian of African and African diaspora societies. I pay attention to the social and cultural histories of people of African descent and their contribution to world civilization. I'm currently teaching and lecturing in the Department of History, University of Cape Coast, and also the Center of African and International Studies of the same university. I live in Ghana. I am an African, and yes, I love being here. Is there any other thing you want me to say?
Yes, where were you born in Ghana?
My father was an officer in the Ghana Army, so I was born at Bema Camp, which is in Accra. It is the Army headquarters or the Air Force headquarters of Ghana.
And when you were growing up, did you speak Ghanaian language, or did you mostly?
It was English and yeah, Ghanaian language, Twi, especially. Yeah.
Okay.
Freedom is, for me, freedom is first and foremost not the situation where one is not being dictated to physically by another and not being in chains by another. But it is a complex of this physical self, determination, as well as mental self-determination, the ability to have that will that nature has given to us, and to use that without any hindrance, and to have the room to think, imagine, fantasize based on your own power. So that for me is freedom. On another level, one I can also consider where one is free spiritually. And being free spiritually is where one is not dictated to, or one's action is not directed by a certain institutionalized religion, which of course religion is social construction, and therefore it serves a particular purpose for a person or groups of people. So one having that ability to be spiritual, and as an African, for example, being in tune with the rhythms of the seasons and the laws of nature, and basically flowing with them without having a book dictated to me to live a certain life in order to have a certain salvation. So for me, freedom is also, as an African, being unchained by what we know as religion, and being more spiritual than religious.
When you talk about religion, of course, we think of the religions, established religion, Catholicism, the important. But what about the Rastafarian religion? Isn't it? Can it fit into the same thing that you are just?
Yes, it's very interesting, and I like you bringing it up. That Rastafari has been conceptualized as a religion, but Rastafari is not a religion. Rastafari is basically a reaction to a political system, to an economic system, an ideology called capitalism, which supported and promoted slavery or colonialism. And so Rastafari is a reaction to it. If one listens carefully to Bob Marley, undoubtedly the biggest ambassador of Rastafari, spreading the message of Rastafari through music, one will hear a line where Bob will say, "And now we know and understand that Almighty God is a living man." So if Almighty God is a living man, then we're not really talking about any kind of, transcendental, thing that is up there that we all look up to, especially in the realms of religion. We're talking about you and I being that power. Now, if we then look at maybe some of the accoutrements of Rastafari and we see them as religious, it is because Rastafari's resistance, when it started, it had to speak to a group of people that had become religious. And so it had to start from the known to the unknown. It just couldn't have come in to say, abandon it. Just abandon it. People wouldn't have followed. So it had to start from somewhere. In fact, using the Bible to even challenge that system that the Bible established, because the Bible was used to enslave people. It was used to colonize people. So now, those who started this movement, this social movement, to cause political and social change, they now had to use the same Bible, at least at the beginning, to get people to understand. And Rastafari will say overstand, not to understand, to overstand that, this scripture says, and you were created in the image and likeness of the ultimate reality. Why then do you have to be, the subject of another that looks like you? And it's in the scriptures. So take it from there. Then after some time, Rastafari will then show itself as something that is not interested in you, dying and going to a certain place where you have gold, roads made of gold. Because the gold is right here. Why then do you have to die and go and have gold whilst you have the gold here? So to a very large extent, Rastafari is very materialistic. It is not only interested in spiritual development, which is a spirituality is again is not transcendent, it's not something that you go somewhere. It's right here. How you relate, how you understand the interconnectedness of all things. That is spirituality. And so you find it in the African idea of Ubuntu, togetherness, oneness. I am because you are. You are me, I am you. We are all connected. Respect the mountain, not because there is a kind of spirit in it, and respect it because it gives you life. Without that, you will not be alive. So spirituality is basically being at one with all and giving respect to those things, because by giving respect, you're giving it to yourself. So within the context of Rastafari, we have to go beyond this religion thing. Because even the men that Rastas came to rally around Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, he, because of his regal position, had to affiliate or identify as a Christian because his family or the royal dynasty that he was a member of historically had identified with Christianity for a very long time. Not Christendom, Christianity for a very long time. So he came in, and before he could even be coronated or and throne, he had to go through certain religious rituals. But then you realize that later he will say that there is a difference between religion and spirituality. He will talk about that. So His Imperial Majesty himself that Rastas look up to, some see him as God, some see him as a great ruler, some see him as a Pan-Africanist. You realize that he himself was conscious of the difference between religion and spirituality. Rastafari, to a very large extent, as I said, will be open to spirituality. However, many of the Rastas are still caught up in religion. They are caught up in religion.
So could you just briefly make clear the difference between what is religion and what is spirituality, so that people can follow it, so that you can apply that to the African context? Because
yes, in the African context, the indigenous African context, there are spiritual systems. We call them spiritual systems. These systems are found in what we refer to as indigenous knowledge. It is not only about belief, it's all about knowing, knowledge. So we refer to them as IK, as indigenous knowledge systems. As I said, you are born into a community and no one will tell you that there is God. You have to feel this God or goddess. You have to feel it. So in Akan, for example, there is a maxim. Obinchira Kolanyame. Akan is one of the ethnic groups here. Obinchira Kolanyame. No one teaches, literally put in, no one teaches the child about God or the goddess. You come into it. You are told that, oh, that river, don't fish in it on a certain day. Don't go to the farm on a certain day. Rest. Respect your elders. Be at one with all. Don't defecate. Don't do things that will harm nature. And they will, because they want you to respect nature, they will say, don't do anything that will harm Mother Earth. Putting mother to it, just for you to have respect for it. That is spirituality. You're born into it. You're told that this animal is your totem, don't eat it. Okay? Religion, on the other hand, has certain characteristics. Religion primarily must have, to a very large extent, must have a beginning. There should be a time when it started. You can identify at least a founder, someone who started it. It is institutionalized. Often it has a set of rules documented, you know. It promises a certain life hereafter where everything is fine. It has eschatology attached to it. If you look at African spirituality, the eschatology is not clear-cut because it doesn't talk about A to Z. All religions will talk about A to Z. Spirituality doesn't talk about A to Z. It's like the linear progression, Darwinian conception of evolution. A, you get to Z, and that is it. Like Christianity will say, it is appointed unto man to die, and after that, judgment. No. In African spirituality, it is cyclical. Yesterday I was talking about, and I started talking about the helix rather than even the cycle, and we drew it on the board, 8, the 0. It is like that. So you realize that there is no heaven in African spiritual systems. You are here. This is your paradise. This is the heaven. If you don't take care of it, because you reproduce yourself, you come back to it. Your children are you. You are your children. So you better take care of this, because if you don't take over, you're punishing yourself. Your children will suffer here. So that is the difference between spirituality. Being at one, understanding that you are interconnected with everything around you, whereas religion is established. Often it has a political agenda or an economic agenda. There's someone there dictating to you what to do. There's someone you look up to as someone who has received a certain revelation. What about you? Don't you have that same power to receive that revelation?
And so in these two contexts, can we talk about freedom within a spiritual context and freedom within the religious context? Can we, because we are here now in Accra, So many churches, so many.
Yes. You realize that to a very large extent, and this is my opinion, religion, that which is religion, binds people. I mean, they would say religion comes from like religio. It's rather to yoke you to someone, but perhaps it rather yokes you to not to a certain power up there, but it really binds you to the will and dictates of another than spirituality. And so you realize that in the name of that which will become known as a religion, people are conquered. People will like to go out and take the livelihood of other people in the name of that religion. So the first question is, was this rather created as a means to an end? That the religion was created to hoodwink people, to understand that a certain group of people are special, or they have been given a certain divine mandate to control everyone or to control the resources of other people. And that's why I said, for example, I used the expression Christendom. If we can conceive of anything as even Christianity and call it a religion, it has become Christendom. Just as, other religions have, you put the dom to it and you have something like a political economic system. And here now people are setting up their own enclaves of that Christendom, and where people are setting up churches and they are fleecing off people, and they are making people to not to think, people start to suspend, that power to reason and rationalize because someone says, I have received a certain revelation. And therefore you realize that people are stripped of their freedom to many people in Africa. I can state that many people are immediately they enter, not even enter, but immediately they start to think about the religions that they belong to. There is a suspension of thinking. And then if you start to really have a conversation with them, you realize that they will start to come in with theological, interpretations. So that theological interpretation is basically a rationalization of that suspension of reason. As a group of people who have indigenous languages, and languages reflect the people's philosophy and worldview and stuff, we have been made to speak French, Portuguese, English, Spanish. And so when we have to use certain words in English or French, or at times we are not really able to articulate very well what we actually want to articulate. Because of ambiguity, because of certain nuances that exist in those words, or even as we express these words. So he talked about the fact that if you are speaking Chi, for example, or Fanti, and you say, and that means if you're grounded in the language, you understand the context that words are used and how they're used and the nuances. And he said, for example, if you say po infanti, if your understanding of the language is limited, you'll understand po to mean maybe a forest, because po can be a forest. But po can also mean to bleach. Po can also mean not, to not something. Po can also mean to be enlightened. So if you're speaking to people, some other person or other people, and their knowledge of the language is not very, deep, or the elasticity is not far, then they may misconstrue or will not understand what you're saying. So for example, if you say freedom, as you rightly said, what is the Fanti word for freedom? What is the Ewe word for freedom? What is the Jula word for freedom? Or what is the word for freedom in one of the ethnic languages of Cameroon? The word may even exist or may not exist, but doesn't mean that people don't have an understanding of this will and ability to use it, and feeling connected. So we often say freedom in Fanti, the language here in Cape Coast, and this is an Akan area. Fanti is one of the languages of the Akan people. You will say Fahunzi, Fahunzi. You realize that it does not define. Freedom is just one word. It's definitive, freedom. But Fahunzi is made up of 3 words. And what you realize is that it does not define, it describes. So it is descriptive than definitive. And so you say fa, hun, zi, it is take. Fa means take or pick. Fa. Hun is self or the body. Hun can also mean the skin. Wo your body or your skin. Or hunam mean the flesh or the meat of the body. Hunam. Hun then can be construed as the self. So take self. Zi is to eat. Zi is eat. Zi eziban, eat this food. Zi. So if we put these words together, what does it mean? You take yourself and eat it. Self-determination. You are in charge of this. Zi. So Fahunzi. That is the popular or the common expression of freedom among the Fanti people. In Asante, it will be Fahundie. Asante is also an Akan language. And so the two, Fanti and Asante and Achim, they all Akan language. So when a Fanti speaks, Asante can hear. Even though some of the words are not they are pronounced differently. So Fahundie is also freedom. But then the question is freedom also liberty? Because here you have different words. Is freedom a synonym of liberty? Or vice versa? I mean, liberty is synonym of freedom. Even in English then, maybe we can start to think about these words. Is it the same? Liberty. Is freedom something that is innate, that is given to you by nature, whereas liberty is something that is conferred on by someone who has in a way impeded your freedom or done something to your nature-given right of self-determination. So someone would say, okay, talking about liberty, then we can talk about liberation. So if we're fighting wars of liberation, to liberate oneself, so to have your liberty, which means at a point in time you were not free. So, but freedom, you're born into this world with liberty, or you're born into this world with freedom. You come into this world with liberty, or you come into this world with freedom. So these are questions that perhaps, as I've been thinking about, but often I talk about the liberty. For example, a colleague and I were talking about the American situation of slavery and emancipation and reconstruction and so on and so forth. And I said, everyone, you see, what happened after Lincoln's proclamation was emancipation. You have been emancipated. But did you actually get your freedom? Did you actually get your freedom? Okay, so you are emancipated. But you're still going to be tied to the apron strings of the landowners, where you cannot do or you cannot make livelihood without going back to them to say, please, let us do some sharecropping and let us work on your land. You are emancipated, but you're not free. So I was really talking about this some time ago with a friend about the fact that, so we're thinking about, okay, Africans in the United States today, what would they call their situation? What is their status? Yes, they are citizens. Citizenship that they acquired because of emancipation. Yes, they fought, so they had agency to get some kind of recognition. So they said, okay, we liberate you. Liberty. But freedom. Are you free? Are you really free to walk the streets without looking over your shoulder if a cop is going to stop you? Are you free? So these are words: emancipated, liberated, freed. Can I really free someone? I think it's in it. Freedom is something that is in it, that you must have, you must possess. It's given to you by nature.
Can I ask you a question about slavery and
Yes.
the history of slavery? We're here at the University of Cape Coast.
Yes.
And I'm interested, so in the United States context, which you just mentioned, the historical sociologist Orlando Patterson from Jamaica talks about the legacy of slavery in America as social death, the concept of social death around an individual. And one can connect that to the birther movement against Barack Obama. One can talk about that in terms of Black Lives Matter today.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that are ongoing. And I'm wondering, in your thought and work, how do you conceptualize the legacy of slavery in relation to freedom in Ghana?
The legacy of slavery, well, first I would just have to, because many Ghanaians don't really know the experience of the enslaved in the Americas. So they may not be able to really relate and even understand African Americans when they act and behave in a certain way against us. They'll go like, why? You live in America, everything is supposed to be fine. They don't know. Here, I would say many are also, well, many know that something happened, and they only saw a tip of the iceberg, because it was people taken, put in chains for months, and then it's gone. They are gone. They are sent somewhere, and there they spend like years there. So many people don't really know what really goes on in slavery. All that they know is that people are captured, put in chains, and then put on boats. What happens after that, they don't know. So they don't have the full story of slavery and the system that system. So even with the little that they have here, then, the legacy is that, okay, it happened, and yeah, some people were unfortunate that they were taken. It was also as a result of wars, POWs sold, okay? I must confess that for many here, except those who are curious to question and to investigate more, many don't even know that slavery existed here as, well, Akosua Pebi calls it domestic slavery, which is again is a misnomer, because immediately you bring in the word slavery, then it changes the understanding of whatever happened here. So perhaps we can talk about some kind of unfreeness based on the fact that some people, submitted themselves and say, I bring myself to you to stop me from, or to direct me. So Akosua Pebi uses the word domestic slavery. People were taken in by others, especially maybe a prominent family will take in another person and say, okay, you're going to work on my farm, you're going to take care of my cattle or work in my house. And you have rights. You are not chattel. So you realize that I don't even have the right to kill you. You can even be so deep in my family that you can even marry someone from the family. This was the African thing. Then also came in the Arab thing. Arab enslavement of people that they considered to be non-Arabs. And so few people in Ghana even have an idea about the fact that there was another form of slavery, this one coming from the Arabs. What they know is the Western one or the European one, which again, I say they only know just the tip of that iceberg. So for many, I would say that legacy has not been one which gives them some kind of pain, because their understanding of it is not deep. However, many are aware of colonialism because it's closer to them. Colonialism. And of course, colonialism from another perspective would say it was just slavery that had just been, repackaged. Now, we don't have to put people in chains, we don't have to put them on boards, but we can make them work here and we can make them do whatever we want them to do. People are more aware about colonialism. However, they are aware of the physical effects that colonialism had on them and their societies, the median. But many are not aware of the mental and spiritual trauma and effects of colonialism on them. And that is why, for example, many people will not feel, or many people are not comfortable when you start to talk to them about religion and Christianity as it was given to them by the missionaries. And the missionaries were, in a way, projecting this in inverted commas, the spiritual arm of colonialism. I use spiritual here, as I said, in inverted commas.
I'm going to stop.
For many, if you talk to them about it, they go like, oh, the good old days. Some of the older folks you talk about them. It's the good old days. What do you mean by the good old days? The colonial period. Yes. We having challenges in this so-called post-colonial period, which to a very large extent is, we must put it on record, it's a neo-colonial period. We're not in the post-colonial period, we're in the neo-colonial period. We're having challenges. But I find it very disturbing and at times difficult to listen to such articulations that the good old days, meaning the colonial period, where there was order. Well, that order was not natural. It wasn't because you wanted to have order, or it wasn't because you couldn't have order. There was order because there was a high hand on you to keep the system running and going in a certain way, not in your interest, but in the interest of the colonizer. Because colonialism fundamentally is the rearrangement or the arrangement of space in the interest of another. And space here can be the physical and it can also be the mental or spiritual. And so someone came in and started to rearrange this physical space as well as mental space in his and her interest. So people go like, oh, we're happy. That was superficial. It was not something that was deep and natural. So the good old days. You have conversations with other people and go like, well, but colonialism also brought the church, hospitals, the railways, the roads, and so on and so forth. Now, this is the legacy where many people are not able to understand that there was no pre-existent demand for colonialism. That colonialism was a virus that intruded. No one called it in. And if it was a virus that intruded, it didn't come in with an altruistic motive. It was fundamentally to exploit. If anything came out of it that now people consider to be some kind of benefit, they were not meant to be or to serve the interests or to serve the colonized. So hospitals had to be built. But the hospitals were fundamentally built first to take care of the colonizer from the scourge of tropical diseases. People were given money now to undertake scientific research in order to produce medicine that will combat tropical diseases. This was not to take care of the one who had lived in this space for thousands and thousands of years. It was to take care of the one who was now coming in, to save him or her from tropical diseases. So you have a whole field of tropical medicine. Who was it to serve? And so if it is gone, colonialism is said to have, it's no longer then when you have neocolonialism, and you have the hospitals remaining. We shouldn't think that the hospitals were in the first place built for the colonized or people who were colonized here. So you speak to people like that. This is the legacy. I mean, you realize, how can you really say this? The schools. We have to understand that we are all victims of a system. We have this formal school system set up. And in our minds, we call them educational centers. They are not educational centers, they're basically schools. Because the concept of education is not one which is based on being in the four, walls or in a room and having an instructor. It is just a little part of the big concept of education. But here today, you have this legacy where when people step out, they go like, oh, that man is an educated man. Do you know what that means? It means he's going to school. If you don't wear a suit and tie, and I'm going to say it, if you don't dress a certain way, people don't see you as educated. You have to dress in a certain way. So, a fraudster, a charlatan, any bad person can just wear suit and tie and enter a space, and everyone will start looking at that person, say, oh, this person must be a good person, this person must be educated. And that is why you have many of the folks, the leaders of churches, always wearing suit and tie, because many of the masses want to see them dressed like that. This person is innocent. He can't be a bad person. He can't be a fraudster. Look, he's wearing suit and tie. They refer to people like that as gentlemen. Now, it means that if you don't dress a certain way, you're not a gentleman. But gentleman is a behavior, is an attitude, is an outlook. So you can be the most gentlest of all people. And if you dress in a certain way, you enter a certain space, people will look at you. Even if you want to approach a certain lady, the lady will go like, you're not a gentleman. Maybe put on a three-piece suit and a tie and come. And they'll say, oh, he's educated. So you have a problem like that going on, and it is deep that many people don't realize that these are legacies. They can only, as I said, talk about the physical damage. Oh, they were arresting our grandfathers, they were beating our mothers, that was colonialism was bad, and but they don't realize these deep, infections and damages, and the insidious part of colonialism is this mental and the spiritual takeover that is had. And still you have, again, you look at all our churches, just go to our churches and see. People are still so comfortable having images and pictures of the white Caucasian looking Jesus. Even if Jesus is an idea, they see this idea as not like them. It doesn't reflect. How damaging can this be in the year 2018? Where you have even reverend ministers who call themselves reverend professors who don't find any problem with this. They don't. After going through, a system that they have committed themselves to pursue, scientific investigate. They still can't transcend or go beyond a certain line. First, because of fear. Fear. Now, this comes back to the absence of freedom. Fear. They can articulate, theorize, talk about everything. Yet, when it comes to a certain line, they are not able to cross because that will disrupt their religious walls and beliefs and the golden idols. They are not able to go. This fear has always been there. One that was put down by the missionaries. If you start to think, if you start to rationalize, far, you burn in hell. That is mental violence. So you find the absence of freedom. You find professors, they know. Up to now, they can tell you the scientific. I go and I see, I teach world civilization. I come and I speak to my students wherever I travel. I go to museums and I take pictures and I say, see fossils, this and that. Can't you see? This is science. something empirical. Yet, we can go. So you still have that fear, which is the absence of freedom from any colonialism.
I just have one last question. It relates to politics and citizenship and the legacy of Kwame Nkrumah.
Yes.
In terms of democracy and Pan-African freedom. So on independence, he says, Ghana's free, but all of Africa must be free. So I'm interested in knowing. To ask the question, I'm going to refer to Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, as a long walk. So in your view as a historian, where is Ghana at? Where is Ghana at on that long walk to freedom? Is it free now, or is it an ongoing process? What do you think about that in the context of democracy and citizenship?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. We haven't reached there yet. Africa has not reached there yet. Africa is under neocolonialism, and the whole idea of citizenship and democracy again must be interrogated, because if we talk about democracy, what kind of democracy are we talking about? And the democracy that we talk about, which is coming from outside, unless we start to consider democracy not as a universal category that is universal but understood within different, what democracy, it must be understood within different cultural zones, then we can start to talk about democracy. What is democracy to the Zulu? What is democracy to the Arab? What is democracy to the man or the woman in the Indus Valley? What is democracy to the Chinese? Is democracy static, or democracy, does it change its nature and form? Does it change? When the Soviet Union was in existence, it believed that it was democratic, but the West believed that it was not democratic. The Chinese believed that they have democracy. So in Africa, for example, we talk about democracy. What do we really mean? Who's democratic, principle or concept that we use in here? Citizenship, again, in the pseudo-nation state, what does it really mean to be a citizen? We talk about nation states in Africa, but do we really have nation states really in Africa? Have we really failed to get that nation state? And what is a citizen? Who is a citizen? Nevertheless, when we come to that freedom thing, Nkrumah was talking about freedom from economic manipulation, freedom from political control, and then he went ahead to talk about the fact that we must move from what he called colonial mentality, which brings me back to all the things that I've been saying. That mentality. So in Nkrumah's conception of freedom, it wasn't just because the Union Jack was down and a new red, yellow, green flag had gone up, and no, it was more than that. And Nkrumah started to use symbols, especially because symbols operate very well at the mental level. So he started to use the symbols. But you had people who were opposing Nkrumah for using symbols. For example, he said, okay, so we're going to have a coin. We have always used this coin, and it has had the head of the Queen of England on it. So Nkrumah said, now we're going to have a coin, and it's going to have my head on it. People started to think of it from a different perspective, saying, it's because you want to be a dictator. That's why you want to put your head on it. But it was to change the mentality of people, that you've seen the head of the Queen of England on your coin, your economy. This talks about, it is valuable. We're going to put an African head on it. You can change it anytime, but at least let's start. If you think that I'm going to be a dictator, let's start. People didn't understand it. So you have that colonial mentality thing that must go, even now. Nkrumah's project was a long thing. He said that, once you fight and you start to get your will, don't sit there.
protect it. So what do you need to do to protect it? So Ghana is trying. Then we must have other spaces that were colonized to come on board. It's only within Nkrumah's thing, within the Pan-African frame, that perhaps, we can inch closer to that point of freedom. Without that, Nkrumah said that it will be meaningless unless it is linked to the total liberation, which means fight. We're talking about liberty. We have to fight. It will be meaningless. Ghana has not reached there yet. And the danger is that many think we have reached there. So it has made them to become complacent. You see, Harriet Tubman said something I always tell some of my colleagues and friends. And he said, he was supporting the Underground Railroad, right? Yeah, he was supporting and spiriting people, like the Negro spirituals. They spirit you away and take you away and send you to the north and Canada and be like away from slavery. And you help many people to do that. And he said, you know what? I could have done more. I could have helped more than the people that I helped, if only they knew that they were in chains.